So, first of all, thanks everyone for tuning in today. And this is a session dedicated to Brexit and more precisely about what I perceive as the untold or not told enough and massive negative impact that it's currently having on a lot of cross-border trade and especially on the entrepreneurs whose businesses rely on this trade. So I've invited top experts from all angles of the issue to discuss it. Right now there's Glen from Trouva, which is an independent marketplace operating across borders. I see that Clara from Vestiaire Collective just joined as well. Hi, Clara.
Hi.
We've also got Vernon, who is operating a third-party logistics platform. And Christopher, who's been advising Michael Gove on this particular topic for the past 2 years. So definitely someone who has a lot to say about the issue and knows a lot about it. And right now there's also Rob, who is from Fonoa, which is automated tax software that Index Disclaimer happens to be an investor in, as we are in Glen's business, Trouva. There are a few more folks who should be joining soon, running both kind of e-commerce websites, but that's and also some advisors to the government. So it should be a lot of different point of view and a lot of different expertise around the table. I'd like to run this session in 2 parts. So first, a panel to go through what are the actual issues and the potential solutions to solve them. And then I'd love to open the floor to the listeners. I mean, after all, that's the whole point of being on the Clubhouse, and let people ask their questions, share their stories, and let's see if with all the people we've got around the table, we can help out and sort some of them out. Although obviously, a lot of them are a little bit beyond this group, but we'll do our best. The impetus behind having this session started in a very simple way with a simple bill that I've had to pay in order to receive an order that I had order from France delivered to my home in London. So back in December, for that very order, it would have cost me 385 euros plus about 10 euros of shipping, which is about slightly less than 400 euros in total. In January, this order cost me the same, so 385 euros plus 120 pounds of various tax and fees, so that's about 140 euros, plus an additional 35 euros of shipping. So overall, it cost me 165 euros more to get the same item delivered in December or in January. So that's about 43% increase, which is pretty nuts. And I didn't really expect, especially as I had heard, as most of us I think had, that we had just signed a great free trade agreement between the UK and the EU. So I was a little bit shocked, and that's how I decided to go a little bit deeper on the issue and realizing that if many more people were having the same problem, there would be a lot of entrepreneurs suffering and having problem across the UK. So that's why I decided to raise the alarm and go a bit deeper. So first of all, I think we need to go a little bit deeper into what is the actual problem and some of these components. So if I start from that bill that I had to pay, there are 4 main components, and it's going to have to be a little bit technical here because we're talking about real technical issues. And so there are 4 main components. The first one is VAT. So VAT is about was 82 pounds on that particular order, so almost 100 euros, which is about 56% of the total surcharge. So more than half was a VAT problem. The second one was what's called cash duty. So it's really very much a duty. That's about a quarter of the surcharge. And then the 2 other slightly smaller one were the shipping rates. So clearly the carriers have been charging me 25 euros extra than they would have otherwise to do the same journey. And then there's one which is a flat fee of 12 pounds, which is the same fee for, as far as I understand, for pretty much every order, which is not a big issue for large orders, but it's obviously a very big issue for small orders. So starting with that, and then I'd like to open it up to the panel. And by the way, I'd love to understand if you guys all, if you could all agree with recording this before you start talking, we'd like to try to record this this session. It's not easy to do on Clubhouse, so we may not be able to, but we'd like to record it and then share it later on LinkedIn if it is at all possible. So if if you guys could all individually say that you're fine with it, one at a time.
Sure.
Yep.
Sure.
Yep. Fine.
Yeah,
Yes.
happy.
Yep.
Yes,
Great.
fine.
Perfect. So we can try. I'm not sure if we'll manage, but so starting with that, maybe Rob, given you're the VAT expert here. So can you explain to me why I ended up having, as a consumer, and then obviously from a business side of view, why did I end up having to pay 100 euros VAT to receive something from France?
Yeah. So essentially, the major difference, of course, that took place in 2021 is that the UK is no longer part of the EU. And as such, the old rules that used to apply on intra-EU trade do no longer apply to this import, essentially, that you have in the UK. Now, if you look at it closely, I think maybe the calculation does not fully add up in terms of how you think about it. Because what would have been the case prior to Brexit is that you would have been charged either French VAT on this or local UK VAT as well, depending on the status of the seller and how much they were selling cross-border. So that's kind of like, that doesn't change a lot. The new rules, both for the UK and the EU coming up in July, will actually impact the overall price in many cases, because it's essentially slightly moving towards a system where the taxation is determined based on where the customer is residing. And so what that means is that if you deal with the EU, for example, 27 member states, you would have different tax rate applying to the same product based on where the consumer is located.
Yeah, but Rob, just to build on that, I think in this case, what I assume has happened is that the seller hasn't deducted the French VAT from the price that Martin had to pay. So even though they didn't have, they're not going to have to pay the French VAT of that if their accounting system is set up properly. But Martin still paid the same amount that would have included the VAT. And then because they've sent it DDU, duties and taxes and duties unpaid, he then has to essentially pay it again when it arrives.
Yeah. So if the seller in this case would have done it in a proper way, the actual difference in tax would have been very little, because it only is the extra shipping component that would then probably come into play. That most likely has actually increased for them as well, but not so much the tax rate applicable, if that makes sense.
So so that was my understanding as well. So clearly this French merchant has pocketed the difference to some extent, which I'm guessing over time will be ironed out. But how do we make sure that merchants understand that the UK is not part of the EU anymore, and they shouldn't be charging French VAT?
This is a really hard one, actually, right? Because what we have seen is that the final free trade agreement that was established between the UK and the EU as part of the whole Brexit deal was of course very lately constructed, right? And some of the details actually came out, I think, like 7 days before the actual new situation became applicable. So what that technically means is that not a lot of companies have been able to fully anticipate these new rules. So I think what you will see, what we have seen, by the way, is that a lot of companies have temporarily ceased to send shipments to the UK and vice versa. And some of them have said for an indefinite period of time, just because they haven't figured out how to make this commercially work.
Okay.
And what that means, to your point, as an actual follow-up, how do we make sure that these companies start to understand this? Well, amongst others, by using software providers like ourselves, and of course external parties that can inform the general public better on this in terms of what to expect, what to do, and how to prepare your business for a continuing e-commerce into the UK again.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that one issue should be ironed out over time. Clara, I think you mentioned that for marketplaces there were some other issues with that in the new construct.
Yeah, definitely. So we were actually prepared. We had already implemented a local VAT number at Vestiaire Collective. Vestiaire Collective is a C2C platform, meaning people sell their fashion, shoes, accessories, items between one another. So when we were planning to get ready for Brexit, indeed, a lot of the details came 7 days before. We tried to anticipate as much as possible through this registration locally. But what was a really, really big surprise and definitely not expected is that the Brexit deal introduced VAT on secondhand, which was not the case before. And it's obviously a huge impact on transactions which actually have already paid the VAT in a way, because when you buy first-hand products, you do pay the VAT the first time. So that has been a huge detriment to our UK to Europe business, because from one day to the other, we had to charge 20% VAT on those cross-border transactions, which, as you can imagine, has a huge impact on the conversion rate of those transactions.
Yeah, and maybe to add to that, Clara, and also Martin, in your use case, what's probably important to note is that in the free trade agreements, essentially the parties have agreed that they will not apply custom duties and tariffs to the extent that the actual product originates from either the UK or the EU, depending on where you import in. What's very difficult in practice is that not a lot of smaller companies understand how to actually prove that their product originates in either the EU or the UK, because this is normally something that's only applicable to larger parties that are used to international trade outside the EU and until recently outside the UK. Which
is even more difficult, I guess, for secondhand, because
exactly.
the users are selling the item from to one another. And don't necessarily have the proof that the item has been manufactured in a place or the other. So definitely putting a huge pressure on secondhand.
Yeah, and effectively what that means is that for any goods, in the case of the UK, that are imported with a value over 135 pounds, or the equivalent in the EU is like 150 euros soon, you will have to pay import duties, which can add up quite a bit, as you can imagine.
So Clara, just so I understand, is it because, I mean, VAT rules in the UK are different than in the EU on second-hand goods? Is that
yes,
the
exactly.
crux of the matter?
Okay. Yeah. So in Europe, second-hand goods are exempt of VAT, but this is not the case in the UK since Brexit. It was the case before. So ultimately, that has had a direct impact of 20% on all the prices of the European items going into the UK, but also the prices of the UK items going to Europe, because this is both for import and export VAT.
So how big of an impact has it been on the business? So if you can share some high-level numbers.
So what has been obviously on the cross-border transaction between Europe and UK, we've seen quite a big impact, almost 30% drop on the conversion. What has been really interesting and how we've tried to react is really to push the UK customers to buy from the UK. And we've seen a huge shift in the business, with the share of products from the UK bought by UK buyers going from 20% to 50% in just a matter of a few weeks. But obviously, especially in a business like fashion, where there are multiple different items you can get, some of the products are not necessarily found in the UK from UK buyers. So it does have an impact in that sense. But also for the UK sellers, it's probably the biggest hit, because they were used to sell their products in a huge market, and they're now their products are now most competitive only in the UK.
Very interesting. Christopher or Leo, do you is that a topic that the government is thinking about?
The short answer is yes. I mean, I think certainly the question of VAT on second-hand goods has cropped up in a number of areas. It also has an impact in Northern Ireland, which of course is governed by slightly different rules. But broadly, yes. Although, I mean, just a couple of observations that really to reinforce what Rob said. That firstly, a lot of these costs, I mean, obviously they're real, to state the obvious, but they're not all accidental. I mean, they are to some extent, if you like, the price of the government's decision to leave the single market and the customs union, and the price, if you like, of knowing what's crossing the border and having an independent trade policy and all that. So the implication of that being, of course, that they're going to be permanent, or at least the processes are going to be permanent. The costs attached to them, one hopes, are going to come down as we come up with more interesting, innovative ways of dealing with them. But because it all came very late for everybody, government as well, there is the adjustment aspect of the cost, if you like, is perhaps greater than it would have been had we had a longer run-in.
Just to build on that, and Martin, I think you asked this question in one of your posts about why are we having these issues when we struck a free trade deal? Wasn't that supposed to sort of solve all this? And I think it kind of gets back to the question of what free trade agreements are there to do. So, normally they're upgrading the trade relationship between two jurisdictions, right? So you start off, you've got nothing in common, you come together, you hash out an agreement, and you agree to go from sort of say 0 out of 10 on cooperation to say 5 out of 10, and you put some rules in place, tariffs, whatever. And what Brexit's done, and as Kristen said, the kind of consequence of the political choice is it's taken us from as close as we could be, the UK and the EU, so kind of 10 out of 10, and it's taken us back down to 5 out of 10, as opposed to up from 0 to 5 out of 10. And so the real question is, what's all the stuff that makes up the difference between 5 out of 10 and 10 out of 10? And the way this deal is structured is that it's not basically the tariff question, with the exception that others mentioned earlier about rules of origin. Essentially, tariffs have been eliminated. When we all sort of followed this debate, and there was a lot of noise about striking this deal, and there's going to be frictionless trade, what that really meant was tariffs primarily being zeroed on most goods. And I think everyone then kind of walked away from that thinking this is going to kind of feel the same as it did before. And in respect to tariffs, that's right. But the other bit, the other kind of half of the equation, is all the stuff that's not tariffs, and people call this non-tariff barriers. And that's where your trainers got kind of stuck, because that's where customs, VAT, border protocols all come in. And what this agreement essentially does pretty much nothing on that second half of the issues around this. So we've talked about the VAT problems, all of the other costs. So for example, around extra shipping costs, these reflect the fact that every good is now going through customs at the UK border, every single good from the EU. Doesn't matter kind of what it is, it's going through a process it wasn't going through before, which means time, it means complexity, it means uncertainty for customers and for suppliers, and ultimately it means cost, because and even I think that the UK government and the EU are recommending that all businesses employ agents to help them deal with this stuff. And so I think it's, in terms of that expectation piece, it's about realizing that the kind of the other 5 out of 10, this agreement doesn't, and explicitly never intended to address. And what we're seeing now is everyone kind of realize that, and then everything come into place, hopefully, to make people get over that adjustment phase. But this is, as Chris said, it's deliberate, it's intentional. It's a cost. It wasn't well trailed.
That's useful context. Thanks, Leo. By the way, I think your microphone, there was some balance issues, so you may want to look into that. But that's super useful context. So like if I try to unpack what you just said, so one of the components, obviously the duty element. So you said there's no duty, and yet I did end up paying about quarter of the charge, so about kind of 40 euros was actually duty. So maybe Vernon and Diego, I mean, you were kind enough to explain to me how that was calculated and how that worked. But I'd love to understand, where did that number come from, and can we expect that to come down in the future, or is it here to stay?
Yes, but if I step back a little bit, I just want to say that not only the consumers like you have a terrible experience, but the supply chains right now are being really affected. Not only e-commerce was growing significantly, then you have the impact of COVID with increased the activity on the parcels, but also now Brexit, it's even adding more strain to the supply chain. So not only the experience is terrible from a consumer point of view, but you also seeing massive delays in when the products are going to be arriving. From a seller point of view, I don't know, you Martin, let me ask you a question. Did you end up paying for the goods, or you?
No, I did. Yeah.
So imagine if you're like big companies, they had the time, resources to prepare for Brexit, and most of them maybe they are not. Imagine the smaller guy, the small retailer. We
estimate that in the UK there are around 150,000 micro and small sellers. These guys, they don't have the resources to prepare for Brexit, and they have the problems of running their company through COVID, and now they have this issue. So from a retailer point of view, you have two options. You continue selling using this DDU, or and the fact is that there is a lack of transparency.
Can you explain a bit what DDU and what DDU means?
Yes, delivery duty unpaid. That means that depending on the type of product, the consumer will have to pay the VAT or the customs at the border, at the customs. So you will be receiving the email that you receive saying, hey, you need to pay for these taxes, for these extra costs that are applied by the carriers on the duty. Now. The issue is that, and that's a terrible experience, but a lot of the parcels are being rejected by the buyers. The buyers are saying, "Hey, I don't want to pay this." So what happens is that the carriers, they need to send back that product to the retailer, and that creates a lot of unintended consequences. So the retailer has to pay for the product to be returned, but also there's another unintended consequences, which is on the carbon footprint. We are generating much more carbon, but by the fact that all these carriers are having to send back all these products. So the problem is, like, can you make the seller agree to buy the purchase and being transparent in terms of the data if you're using DDU, or the alternative is called DDP. That basically means that the seller will pay. But the problem from a UK point of view is that right now, until the OSS, or one-stop shop, that comes into play in July, I know Christopher knows, or Rob knows much more about this than me, but before then, if you want to say, okay, I'm a seller, I want to take care of the charges, you need to be registered as a VAT in each of the countries that you're sending the product to, and that's kind of impossible. So right now, these guys are facing the issue of, okay, I send it through DDU, the experience is terrible, I might get the product back because the people don't want to pay the extra taxes, or I need to register VAT in all these countries. So these guys are deciding, and in my company, in Bezos, that we work with small and medium sellers, mainly from the UK. 30% of their volume goes to Europe. Most of them have decided to stop sending their products. So it is a big problem from a UK retailer point of view, and I'm sure we can discuss a few solutions. But until the OSS come into place, they will be really constrained.
And if I may add to that, I think what we realized as well is the carriers, they were as little prepared as the companies. And a lot of the carriers, especially the ones between France and the UK, they hadn't done cross-border before. So I'm talking here about Chronopost or DPD. Some carriers had to completely stop operating because they were not ready to operate.
Yep.
For example, UPS stopped handling packages for us from one day to the other. So you have a lot of pressure on some of the carriers who have been preparing for it and are able to do all the work related to this border, for example, DHL, but they are facing huge issues in terms of capacity. Because basically all the e-commerce flows are falling onto the same carriers. So to give you a concrete solution on what we implemented with them, we had to start having daily calls to really review every day what is the number of packages we are going to have, how many packages are going to cross the border one way or the other, how do we make sure we secure this capacity.
And may I add to that I read an article from someone from DPD that when you send the stuff from one country to another, you need to put the HS code and you need to put the description, the right description of the products. And a lot of the information was going in the wrong way, and the technology that DPD had initially wasn't the right one, or they weren't checking. And the number is 20% of the parcels had incorrect data and had to go back. That number dropped from 20%, they said, now to 5%, but it still remains, and this is just DPD. So the problem is it is like a perfect storm. It affecting carriers, governments, and retailers.
Glen, Go ahead, Christopher.
No, sorry, just to sort of extend that point. I think looking across, obviously talking about fast parcel operators there, but the fundamental problem at the moment appears to be the provision of data by the suppliers in the first place. So a lot of these bigger businesses are more ready, obviously, than some, but the difficulty is them getting the right data. So just to sort of reinforce the point that applies, getting people used to having to provide the data is a big part of the preparation problem, which obviously was made worse by the fact we only had about a week between the deal being announced and the deadline.
What kind of data are we talking about, and is that data already in the ERPs and in their e-commerce platforms?
Others might be more expert, but others might be more expert. Sometimes it will be, but not always.
So what was?
Yeah, I think the bit that is generally not available is HSS codes, which are the kind of a classification, and the origin data, because I think being able to prove did the product come from within the EU or the UK. That's generally a lot of companies just haven't had to worry about that.
Can I jump in here? So it's Rachel speaking, and Diego, I loved everything that you said because I related to it so well. And I am one of the smaller companies out of the people on the call here. To all intents and purposes, we're a startup, and we are supplying lots of goods which are music related through a new e-commerce platform. And there's a few things that I just wanted to touch on. First of all, the country of origin, which Glenn has said it's difficult to find out. I think this is one thing which really hasn't been talked about enough, because even when you know your country of origin, if the product or the components of the product that you are selling do not originate from the UK, you need to pay duty. And the UK isn't a country which is known for a great deal of manufacturing, and even when things are manufactured, a lot of the ingredients or components come from overseas, and so there's a lot of products that we have to pay duty on, and we have absolutely no choice, and clothing is one that's particularly relevant for me. We source sustainably, we source ethically, we spent a huge amount of time investing in a really good supply chain, but cotton is not grown in the UK. Cotton comes from overseas, so we will be paying all our duty on all our clothing, and obviously there's a lot of other products like that. The second thing that I wanted to touch on was, as a small business, just trying to get our head round all these new rules has been unbelievably difficult, and I'm still not there, even though I've been working on it since the new year. And I think somebody mentioned that the government recommends that businesses use an agent, and I have found that extremely frustrating, because not every small business is set up with the resources or indeed the budget to take on an agent to help them. Also, I'm questioning how many agents there are set up and available to help businesses, because this did come so very last minute. I'm not sure all those resources are out there to help. But as a small business, I tried to do this myself, and the first thing I'll say is there's a wealth of government information out there online, but it's not created for the layperson to understand at all. It's really, really difficult to navigate, and there's old information that's out of date still being provided by the government as well, so some of it's very, very contradictory. And then when you actually start looking for technical information, you keep going back to the answer of try and find an agent. And again, I read somewhere recently that it was only something like 20% of the agents that are actually required to support all the businesses in the UK are actually in existence at the moment. I couldn't find the source of that, but I don't know whether that's true and whether anybody else has an opinion on that. But certainly I haven't seen a lot of these agents out there, apart from aiming at the much larger businesses and expensive as well. So just to tell you what I did, I contacted HMRC to get some information to some questions. The first thing is web chat is never available. The second thing is you can make an inquiry online, but there's a 15 working day wait list for that. And when I eventually got my questions addressed, I was just sent hyperlinks to the website, which I'd already been looking at and hadn't found the information I need. And there's a telephone helpline, and you have to book an appointment. And I had to wait, I think, about 9 days to speak to somebody who was absolutely great. But I then had follow-up questions, and they still remain unaddressed 2 weeks later. So I don't think the government's there to help people who don't have an agent. I'm not convinced all the agents are out there either. And lastly, I'm just going to mention that my accountant said there's a grant available, Rachel, for small businesses, a £2,000 grant to help pay for professional advice. So I went online to try and sign up for that. And that hasn't gone live yet, even for applications. That's going to be provided by PwC, and that's not even live yet, halfway through February. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, that's...
These are the practical problems that a small business is happening. It's not just that there's a huge amount to try and navigate. It's actually navigating through it is very, very difficult and very time consuming.
And I mean, thanks, Rachel. That's great first-hand experience. And Diego, Vernon, is that this agent construct? Is that something that companies like yours, obviously we're not here to do promotion, but these third-party logistics startups, is that so that you guys help out with, or is it a totally different setup?
Well, the solution that we provide to sellers is that we have available a network of warehouses outside the UK. So basically, the solution would be to register EORI in EU, get a VAT in one of the countries where you're going to be selling the goods, and do the distribution from Europe to Europe, and vice versa. We also have what we call the partner ecosystem, and we have some agencies that they work with us, and we refer them to sellers, but they will have to bear the cost. I do think that ultimately the solution is about data transparency and collaboration. I think marketplaces, platforms like Shopify, the government and the carriers, they need to stop working in silos, and they need to start creating obviously the solution is technology.
Sorry, Diego, we just lost you here.
That technology layer that will allow sellers to be transparent on the prices, whether they want to do DDU or DDP, and it will be connected all the data into one place, so there's no mistakes, and the process will follow through. But I'm not seeing that happening at the moment.
That's, by the way, Diego, exactly what we have on offering for marketplaces as well as direct-to-consumer e-commerce retailers that actually try to automate this to the extent possible to minimize the damage there. But to Rachel's earlier point, that's of course hard if you're like in a very early stage kind of setup, because that may not be an option for you, but that at least is one way of helping.
And Glen, obviously, at Trouva, you are selling from small independent boutiques in the UK and across Europe to buyers across the continent and in the UK. And you mentioned, on LinkedIn that you had been doing a lot of prep work and you felt like you were pretty well prepared. So did you register? I mean, I don't know if you're on, but did you register VAT on every European markets, and how did you deal with the duties?
Yeah, so you're right. Firstly, it was a huge amount of work. I think for us, it's not just the getting things to the customers, but it's also a lot of it was actually working with the boutiques, our sellers, to make sure they, like Rachel was saying, that they understood the implications for them, that they had thought about how they were going to be able to continue importing their products, how they were going to be able to continue selling things on their sites as well. So we kind of took them through a whole kind of communication series over a couple of months, explaining the implications, explaining to those guys that they needed to apply for EORI numbers, they needed to figure out, are they the importer of record, or is the supply of the importer records, so they didn't get caught out. So there's a lot of that kind of work, and then yeah, we work really closely with our couriers, and we basically now do everything DDP. So there's nothing for the customers to pay, but we've only been able to do that by completely re-engineering our checkout, and a combination of using the couriers as brokerages and doing some of our own VAT registrations as well. So we've kind of got a bit of a hybrid solution, which allows us to continue to ship without any impact on the customer experience. But it is much more expensive for us. And then you kind of come into questions around conversion rate and how much do you kind of suck up yourself versus, building into shipping costs versus kind of having extra charges on top. But actually, the biggest problem we're having at the moment is the lead times. It's I think Clara was saying, just the capacity is so constrained. It's taking us, with UPS, it's taking kind of 10, 15 days sometimes now to get things through. And I think it's, with the best will in the world, even if you get all your paperwork correct and you get everything right, just the general slowness in the system is just meaning that everything is slowing down. And I think my worry is really around the impact on consumers in terms of their perception of cross-border, which is, yes, even if things do get better, if everyone has one bad experience, Martin, you've now got screwed by this cost, you're just now going to be much more nervous about buying something cross-border. Even if your next interaction was with Trouva and we've actually done all our work, you might just assume that actually the experience is going to be pretty bad and not even try it. So I think there's a big question there about kind of how to retain consumer confidence and not just have people just intrinsically scared of buying cross-border.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And by the way, just sharing my experience with Trouva, which I talked to you about, is at the same time I was ordering these shoes, I also ordered a gift from a UK boutique to a friend in Portugal on the 2nd of January. And that order to date still hasn't arrived. And I got actually informed yesterday that it had been cancelled because it had been lost by customs somewhere in Portugal, and that I was being reimbursed by you guys, I would assume. But is that a common occurrence, or is that a one-off? They get unlucky on that, or is that happening all across Europe on your platform at the moment?
I think it's pretty rare for things to get lost, but what we're seeing is that there's no consistency between countries, right? So I think you were sending something to Portugal. And in Portugal, the how something is treated depends on whether it is classified as a B2B transaction or a B2C transaction. If it's a B2B transaction, you need to supply the tax number of the company you're sending it to. But there is nowhere in the customs forms to declare whether something is a B2B transaction or a B2C transaction. So the customs basically just guess and decide, does this sound like it's going to a company or a person? And if it sounds like it's going to a company, then they ask for all these registrations, and then we have to have a back and forth with them that says, actually, no, it's not. That's not a company. That's a person, and try and prove it to them. But that's Portugal, right? Spain's different. France is different, and I think there's just a lot of complexity there for companies now to deal with, and it's all totally different. It's all totally non-standardized. So hopefully, we're going to get experience of, when we send something to Portugal, this is how we do it. But it has just added a lot of overhead, and we can deal with it somewhat because we have some scale. But, if you're only sending one thing to Portugal, every few weeks, you're going to find it very hard to deal with that.
So concretely, you've done tons of work. It would be super helpful, I think, for some of the entrepreneurs listening in on the call. For some practical, what have you done in practice to enable that seamless, somewhat seamless experience?
Yeah, so I think we've had this DDP versus DDU thing come up a bit, and I think fundamentally, every company has to have this hard decision around: do you do DDP or DDU? When you do something DDP, you basically are saying that you are taking all the liability for whatever charges are going to come up, and then you work with third parties to try and get a best estimate of what those charges are going to be ahead of time. And you have to decide, how much of that, how practically are you going to charge that, or are you going to kind of take some of that cost yourself? So we've gone down that DDP route, and we work with our couriers, and we do everything DDP, and that allows us to say on the consumer side that you're not going to be charged anything. We've then had to do all the work in the background, I think, particularly around this VAT piece, that you showed there, to avoid customers having to pay that VAT twice, so that we essentially, if something's going from the UK to Germany, we have to make sure that we're not charging both UK and German VAT on it. We're just charging the German VAT, and the German VAT might be a different rate to the UK VAT rate. So some countries are 22%, 23%, we're 20% here. So we had to do all of that work. The other thing I think that hasn't come up in the conversation, which I think is important, is that in parallel with Brexit, there's been some new marketplace VAT rules that have come in, and conveniently, a whole bunch of stuff has been all lumped in to come in on the 1st of January, just to make things extra complicated. So from the 1st of January, things leaving, things in the UK, going cross border, now the marketplace is responsible for paying the VAT as opposed to the seller, and that's only in one direction at the moment. In July, the EU portion comes in, so we're in this weird bit at the moment where for some of our cross border in one direction, we have to do the VAT registrations directly, and in the other direction not. But the days of marketplace being able to kind of sit back and just say, hey, look, VAT is this thing that happens outside of what we care about, that's between these two disconnected parties, and we're just in the background. I kind of think those days are gone. So I think really, as a startup, if you're in that marketplace model, you really do have to kind of confront VAT from day one and figure out how do you are going to be in the VAT chain.
And this,
Go ahead, Clara.
Yeah, that was really important for Vestiaire, was the education to customers, because the introduction of VAT was new for secondhand. A lot of the customer didn't expect it, and this has been probably one of the most problematic things we've had to do, because in 1st of Jan we introduced the 20% VAT directly in the cart, because we took this route of dealing with all the process ourselves rather than having the buyer have a call from the cross-border management saying, hey, you now have to pay this and this extra. But a lot of customers were really doubtful on what are you trying to do? Are you trying to pocket 20% extra on the transaction? This should not happen because there's a free trade agreement. So I would definitely encourage everyone to spend quite a good amount of time on thinking how to communicate all those things to the end users, because it's not that straightforward, and can create a lot of contacts. For the anecdote, we had the highest number of comments on a website page due to this Brexit announcement, and we spent countless hours trying to answer each and one of them, but also educating ourselves in the meantime on trying to understand all the extent of this problem.
Well, thanks, Clara, for sharing that. So, by the way, for anyone who just joined, and there are a lot of people in the room, just to give you, just to some background. So, we're speaking with startups and tax and policy experts about the challenges that their businesses have been facing following Brexit, and it's a pretty meaty topic, as we just heard. There's one small bit we haven't talked about yet, which looks like a bit of a detail, but it's this kind of direct payment processing fees, which is a flat £12 fee, as far as I understand. And it looks tiny. If you have a large order, obviously £12 is not necessarily the end of the world. But obviously, as far as I understand, it's just the cost of a good crossing the border, regardless of its price. And I've heard and I've seen hundreds of comments about the people having to pay that for items worth 10 or 20 pounds, which obviously makes no sense and would totally destroy any kind of high volume, low value type of cross-border e-commerce. Is that fee? What is that? Is that something that's charged by the carriers because they can to protect themselves? Is that something related to some form of regulation? Does anyone know about that? Because it looks tiny. In my order, it was nothing, but on small orders, it would be significant.
Yeah, so customs can actually charge you essentially a handling fee for them to deal with customs clearance. But sometimes what you see is that either the shipping company or broker or whomever is actually involved in the customs declaration adds something to that. And that should be actually specified in your terms with them. But yes, they are allowed to have a cost on charge for their work.
And Christopher, maybe so, obviously representing the UK government to some extent here, that's from what I've seen, it's a very big problem. As how a small amount can really disrupt smaller orders. Is that something that you would push to waive or to some extent?
First, I should be a bit careful. I'm not part of the government. I'm an advisor to somebody in it. Just to be,
you're the closest thing to the government we've got on this call. So
maybe I need to caveat that. I mean, look. Ultimately, obviously, it's a cost. It's really for the. I think the view would be for the marketplace to determine what the actual cost of that administration is. And I don't. The bits the government does, things like applying duties and taxes and requiring processes, is within the government's gift. But how those are applied and worked through is really a matter for the market. And so I don't think that would be the way that the government would try to go. But I just coming back to the point I made early on about what some of these processes may be permanent, but the costs associated with them, one would hope, are not necessarily, or at least not at the scale that they are now. So, I don't know what goes into a £12 admin charge, but it's presumably covering a lot of the things we've just discussed, and a lot of that is as a result of people aren't, there's a lot of dead weight cost in there, if you like, of people not being familiar with processes. So, I suspect the most effective way of getting that down is a combination of competition and technology and innovation on the platforms and between companies, I would have thought.
Yeah, if I can add to that, this is Vernon speaking. It really comes down to these processes that are probably very manual right now. I heard somebody, I forgot who it was, Clara, saying daily calls with DPD. So it comes down to what Diego said earlier, data transparency, sharing with data, and automation of processes. These, to be clear, these carriers and 3PLs are operating at very low margins. It's not like they're high margin businesses. So everywhere where they have a cost, they try to recoup it. And my suspicion, I don't know more about, but my suspicion is that this is related to that, where they're trying to recoup an extra cost.
And to add to that, I don't think those costs are going to go away anytime soon until the technology, as Chris said, will be developed. So the retailers are faced to have a few options. Either they stop sending the goods because they're having a terrible experience, or they decide to work with companies like us and have all split their inventory into two different regions. But that also has to they need to look at, okay, can I afford that extra investment in splitting the inventory versus not having the sales? So this is the question that these retailers are having right now.
Yeah, just so we. From our perspective, there's a lot of products we're not selling now, which we were lower value products, because it's just not affordable with that extra cost on it.
Could I add just one thing on, Martin? Is that all right?
Sure.
So just on the data and connected obviously to the cost, the one thing that I think is recognised in government very clearly is the solution to all this is data, and particularly the transparency of data and the speed with which it can be integrated and shared. And to a large extent, the rate limiting factor, at least in my observation, I've worked on this over the last 12 to 18 months, in that is actually government systems rather than industry systems. But the good news, if we want a little bit of good news, is that is very much recognised, and there is quite a lot of work underway right now to modernise that. So I would just draw anyone who's interested in this their attention to what's called the Border 2025 strategy, which is largely built around data and how that can be integrated across supply chains and with government better. Just as a sort of, it won't solve any problems tomorrow, but it is worth knowing about.
Thanks, Chris. That's great to maybe finish up this panel on a more positive note. I'd love to get some of the people listening. If there are entrepreneurs among you or others who have questions or stories to share, or would like to get some advice on how to improve their processes. We would love to hear from you. If there's anyone, I think you need to raise your hand. There's a button for that. Yeah, Fred. So Fred, I've just invited you on stage, and here you are. Fred.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on stage. I just wanted to ask a question as to whether any of you had seen and could name and maybe could help the audience with companies that are in terms of inventory splitting, we talked about, but also facilitating the process, handling the process on behalf of startups. So are there other companies out there that we should go talk to?
Well, our company, we can definitely help you with that, and the way we work is we are kind of a one-stop shop. So with one account and one integration, you're able to kind of manage your European and UK fulfillment. But I'm sure there are other companies too.
Combined with what we do, Diego, I think that makes
you should build
sense.
out your bio, by the way, Diego.
We do the exact same on the taxation side. So we can handle essentially all of the tax calculations, the invoicing, the reporting flows, so that companies can be fully compliant.
So Freddie, if you check on my post on LinkedIn, there were quite a few other companies in the space which commented and shared them. And I think as a follow-up to this, we'll do some work on exactly that, on kind of benchmarking and mapping the different technology providers and logistics providers who could help out.
Also, I want to add that if anyone wants a very easy to understand summary of all these impacts of Brexit, just to contact me, and we have a 5-pager. I'm happy to share it with you.
So if I can share my experience just as a VC very quickly, but I don't think this is going to go away, right? So if you're a European startup looking to operate out of the UK, you kind of need to take structural actions right away. So for example, I'm involved with a company called Collective Benefits that looks at providing insurance benefits to flexible workers or platform workers, whatever you want to call them. And we've set up an entity in Denmark to be able to operate on a pan-European level. So I think, yes, technology will catch up, but my advice to founders would be, hey, you need structural solutions around this stuff because it's going to be painful for a while. And with that, please kick me back to the audience.
Thanks, Fred, for sharing your experience. Anybody else who? Yeah, someone is raising their hand. As if. Here you are. The stage is yours, as if.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm on the move, but I just wanted to quickly just jump in. I just by way of background, I am a sort of tax and accounting advisor to startups, but I also, for my sins, sit on the advisory board at HMRC and the Treasury. And even though I can't necessarily go into the specifics of the discussions there, just given the rules of how that's operated. But a lot of the stuff that's been discussed is certainly on their radar. But I am also tasked with feeding back from the front line specific scenarios that I can help get to the right desks and ears at HMRC. People that I know are dealing with the comm strategy, as well as just how startups can get in contact with HMRC. So if anyone has any specific scenarios that they're really just sort of banging their head against a wall with, please feed them into me, either on here or on other socials or DMs or whatever it might be. And frankly, I think I have a line to be able to get those messages across to the right people. So yeah, I just wanted to raise my hand and just let everyone know about that in case they were struggling with finding the right people at the right places.
That's super helpful. Thanks, Asif.
Thanks.
Anybody else in the audience with burning questions, challenges, stories to share? Yeah, there's one. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Karthik. Thank you, Martin, for the opportunity to share my thoughts as well.
You're welcome.
to introduce myself very quickly, I'm the COO at a marketplace called Wolf and Badger. We are a UK-based marketplace that connects independent brands all over the world with customers all over the world. And this has obviously been a top of mind challenge for us even before Brexit, as we've wanted to build the tech to ship internationally for quite some time. And I'm happy to say that we have solved it to a certain degree, and actually it has catapulted our growth in the last year. So maybe I'll just share some learnings from my end, if that's okay.
That'd be great. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So I think at a very high level, the way we thought about it is, what are we trying to solve for here, right? So the first thing we're trying to solve for is, but I guess the only thing we're trying to solve for is the customer experience, because and if we were to try and solve that at the highest level, all the solutions for the various problems will cascade from that point, right? So how can we improve the customer experience? Two ways. First, reduce the markup, quote unquote markup, that a customer has to pay as much as possible, right? Because let's face it, there is going to be a markup, whether, and trying to get that markup percentage to zero is quite challenging, right? So we have to try and reduce that percentage markup as much as possible. Second, reduce the shock or surprise element that you had, Martin, when you received your pair of shoes, because what happens in 90% of international e-commerce is that the customer receives a surprise duties and taxes bill, just like everyone in the UK is receiving now, and they end up returning it, right? In the process, in the process of reducing that shock, if you can actually improve the overall shopper journey, there's actually a real opportunity here for you to gain an edge over your competition as well. So those are the two things we tried to solve for, and I'll explain in a bit how we solve those things. But the real upside of solving this problem is that once you've put in place the high-level frameworks to solve these problems, you can, on paper, theoretically, plug and play any new international market into this technology, right? Because there is nothing unique about the UK or Europe in as much as any new international market that you want to ship to will have some local regulatory frameworks that you need to overcome in order, right? So let me tackle this point by point. So how do you reduce that markup that the customer has to pay? In the case, this is very much geography dependent. So in the case of the EU, I think this came up in the first few minutes of the call. The real trick, at least that we have found, is to deduct the VAT at the point, deduct the VAT from the merchant, right? So educating those merchants on shipping internationally, and the fact that actually when you do ship internationally, there's no EU VAT on that transaction, we have found to be quite beneficial. And merchants completely accept that, because at the end of the day, they don't have to pay that VAT over to the taxman, right? So that actually reduces the friction there almost by 50 to 60%. The second thing that we did at Wolf and Badger, and this goes back to 2019, is we started building the cost of these extra duties and taxes into the price of the product itself. So when the customer checks out, they pay one price, right? And arguably this price is 15% or 20% higher than they would have paid otherwise. But they don't get any surprise bills at delivery, and as a result, they have a better customer experience. Now, when we first launched this feature, I'll admit that we were a bit nervous. We were a bit nervous of whether our conversion rate will fall. Will customers really understand what duties and taxes paid shipping is? How will this actually translate with customers? And what we found counterintuitively is that customers actually love this. Customers loved this new feature, and the moment we gave them confidence that, hey, we are doing duties and taxes paid shipping, it's all included in one price. You don't have to worry about it. You can just buy the product, get the item delivered to your door, and voila, you're done. Is actually actually improved our conversion rate. Customers loved it, right? It improved our it improved our conversion rate. It improved our Trustpilot scores. It improved our FIFO scores, and overall actually had a knock-on effect in terms of repeat rate, in terms of lifetime value, in terms of actually reducing our overall customer acquisition cost. So without going into too much more detail,
but Olu, just Cartier, one question. I mean, first, I love this. I really love this view of it opens up the rest of the world. This is very much the global
Correct.
Britain that some people have mentioned. So it's great to see it in action. Just out of curiosity, what percentage of your revenues is coming from outside of the EU at this stage?
So it's actually almost all of our almost 45% of our revenues come from outside the UK at the moment, and I guess pre-Brexit that number was about 37%. But pre-building this technology, something like 70% or 75% of our revenue was in the UK. So the moment we built this technology and started rolling it out, we could effectively plug and play new markets into our backend within a relatively short period of time, because all we needed to do was tell our technology what are the special, quote unquote, special rules that this new market needs to follow, and then we would everything else would cascade down from there. So today I think we're 45% international revenues, about 30% in the US, and 15% rest of the world. Does that help?
Wow, impressive. Yeah, very, very, very helpful. And the technology you've built everything in-house, so you've been basically plugging, connecting different services through APIs, or how have you built that technology?
So I would say about 90% of the tech stack was built in-house, because apart from Farfetch, who I know is one of Index's is portfolio companies, Martin, there are not many other players out there who understand this sort of anywhere to anywhere international shipping, if I may say that. So a lot of them do international shipping, but it's usually one to many, right? So for example, if an ASOS or an H&M want to ship internationally, they have one warehouse, and they can ship from that warehouse anywhere in the world, and that is slightly less complex to solve in terms of regulatory frameworks, but there are still the 10% of the tech stack that we still connect with is that's not built internally is a tool that helps us make the actual shipping label, for example, but the heavy lifting is done by our code, because our code actually tells the label making tool, I'm trying to simplify it here, sorry, tells the label making tool what are the duties and taxes for that lane? How much are you actually going to pay in terms of shipping fees, right? And then does this need to be DDP, or does the commercial invoice for this shipment need to have a VAT number, or does this commercial invoice need to have a particular note alongside it because that country needs that note in order to clear the shipment at the border? Does that help? Does that help?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thanks a lot, Cartier, for your for sharing your experience. And
Thank you.
It clearly does sound like there is an opportunity for a startup to, and I think we have a few here on set, but to replicate what you built in house and offer that as a SaaS product.
Yeah.
Well, I think I had asked the speakers for 1 hour of their time, which they very kindly kind of offered, and I want to be respectful. They've all got companies to run, and so I want to thank you all very much for sharing your experience. I've definitely learned a lot. I think we've made some headways, and it sounds like with data and technology, and when some of these new VAT rules and the government's own software stack gets improved, hopefully at some point during this year. I think by the end of this year we should be in a much better place than we are today. But I think to Fred's view and to Cartier's point as well, it sounds like entrepreneurs that do want to go cross border have to build it in house or at least build their company around that from the get go. and it can't be an afterthought and think that these barriers will disappear, because as Chris said, they are a consequence of the choices that have been made by the people, or by majority of the people, and they are here to stay for UK startups. So
Martin, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob. Yeah.
Just to add, I would actually normally advise companies that are not in this business not to start building it themselves, but instead find a nice API solution for exactly this problem, like we have developed. Because essentially what Kartik was saying, that he has very beautifully built in-house, which is very impressive, by the way, my compliments, is exactly what our business is.
I didn't want to promote yet another index company too blatantly, but
no, makes sense. It's more that I think for most companies, it's probably a lot easier to just integrate through an API one time and then have all those features versus trying to kind of reinvent the wheel.
No, for sure,
right?
Sure. Yeah, that was definitely.
I agree. It was an incredibly complex task. But
yeah, I imagine.
I will offer one other slightly contrarian point of view in that. I heard a comment earlier that actually, as a smaller company, this might be harder to solve, and that the bigger companies might be more well adjusted. I would say actually being at a smaller revenue run rate when we tried to solve this actually helped us, because not having that volume of complexity to deal with in the beginning helped us put those frameworks into place a lot more easily. If we were a company that was doing multi-billion pounds in revenue already, it would have been such a complex task that we would have likely stopped shipping like a lot of other bigger competitors have. So just something I would encourage amongst the other smaller companies that we have on this chat, that lack of complexity will actually help us solve the problem as opposed to the other way around.
On that note, I think that's a perfect end to this session. Thank all of you for your time. Thanks for listening and all of your questions. It was super helpful. So I'll let you get on with your day, and see you soon, and good luck with your business.
Thanks for organizing, Martin.
Thanks, Martin.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks all.
Thanks.